Okay. I have one last problem that we need to work on as far as yields are concerned. You have a recipe that calls for 10 kilo of dry beans, whatever kind we have. First, the beans are sorted to remove the bad beans. And we have a yield in this process of 95%. Then we soak and cook the beans, and the yield of this process is 300%. Then we transfer the beans into a serving pan, and in each pan at the conclusion of service and in the pot that we cook the beans, there's some beans that are left. And so in each of those, there's about a 5% loss of the beans. What is the weight of the beans that are available to eat and to do nutrient analysis? What we have is a three-stage problem. So the first thing that we need to know is we started out with 10K, and we have a 95% yield, so that's 9.5 kilograms of beans that we're going to cook. So that's what we're going to use now for our calculation. And so 300% of 9.5 is going to give us then the weight of the cooked beans. And then we have a 5% loss. But what do we do with 5% loss? What do we do with a 5% loss? We get a 95% yield. So what we have is a 95% loss, a 95% yield, another 95% yield, and a 300% yield. So what we can do is we can multiply 0.95 times 300, or 3.00, because we were dealing with percents, so 3.00, and then times 0.95. So the way that I would do it, I would do 0.95 times 0.95 times 3, and that's going to give me the answer. Just falls out, just like that. Very easy. Or, if you wish, you can do it as 3 separate problems. You'll get the same answer. Any questions? So I start out with 10 kilo, and I multiply that times 0.95 times 0.95 times 3 equals 27.075. Is that what any of you got? Does that sound like a reasonable answer? You started out with 10 kilo and you ended up with 27 kilo. Seems reasonable to me, because those beans have grown as we have soaked them and as we have cooked them. Okay? Frankly, this is as difficult as the problems get. No more difficult than that. Okay? Now, let's change our approach now. And we're going to go into the next section. day before yesterday, and now today, we are dealing with the process subsystems in the general systems model. We have dealt with purchasing, we have dealt with storage, we have dealt with production, and now we're going to look at the fourth and final section of these 4 functional subsystems, which is going to be, particularly as we're focusing this class, is on patient care. So we're looking then at patient service. The global understanding that I think we need to look at in terms of patient food service is whatever process we use, we need to maintain the quality of the food product. That's it. So we need to maintain that quality in the assembly and distribution process to maintain temperature and nutrition standards. Now, meal assembly and distribution components depend upon the kind of production system that you have. A number of years ago, I went to a workshop, and the workshop was geared around the idea of what system parts do we put together to come up with an optimum tray production, service, and distribution system. At the end of the workshop, what was the conclusion? Any idea? You weren't there, but can you guess? It really doesn't matter. I paid all that money to go to this workshop halfway across the country to come up with this conclusion that it doesn't matter. Because, and that is a very valid and logical conclusion. It's really the only conclusion that you can come to. And so what I want to do this afternoon is to look at some of those components and show you why we need to use the systems approach to management. Systems approach to putting all of these components together to come up with an optimum tray, assembly, and distribution system. First of all, the system is going to be dictated by the environment, particularly the local environment of the medical center or the hospital. What is of value to them? What do they want to see happen as far as how the patients are treated and how the patients are served? And so we need to then look at all of the components. Let's go back to the 3 different types of production systems that we talked about 2 days ago. Do you remember what those were? What was the first one that we talked about? The predominant production system. Conventional production system. That's where food is prepared and served in the same location without any break. We prepare it, we serve it, we distribute it. Bang, bang, bang. It's done. And so, in terms of looking at these components that need to go together in a conventional production system, do we need to look at any component that is going to chill all of the food, to keep all of the food cold as it's being distributed to the patient? No, because we've got hot food on that tray. We don't want that hot food getting cold. So what we need to then look at are distribution systems that are going to help us to maintain the temperature of the hot food and hopefully to maintain the temperature of the cold food as well. So that's how a system would work together, because let's go to a cook-chill system, for example. Do you want to have all of that food chilled, put into storage, removed from storage, assembled on a patient tray line, cold, and then distributed to the patient? At some point, that food needs to be reheated, at least the center of the plate. What system are you going to choose that's going to help in that process? That's a systems decision, and it is based upon what the local conditions are. So there's no one best way. So let's look at some of the alternatives that we have available to us that I think that it will make maybe just a little bit easier to understand. There are two issues that we need to understand first of all, and one is centralized versus decentralized. Centralized assembly and distribution means that tray assembly is going to happen in one location, and then those trays are going to be distributed to the various places where patients are located. And so the kinds of equipment that we need for this kind of a distribution system are going to be the things that we see. First of all, I'm sorry, I am trying to... That self-leveling tray dispenser in the left-hand side, that is a cart that contains trays, and as you remove the trays, they always are at the same level. So that's a piece of equipment that we would have at the beginning of the patient tray line. We would have typically some way to keep the food hot. And one of the approaches that's taken is the use of a unitized base. This unitized base is stainless steel. It's about that thick, and it's just larger than the size of your plate. So you tell the company the size of your plate, and then they will sell to you the appropriate sized unitized base for you. Inside the unitized base, typically there is a substance. Typically beeswax is one thing, or it may be another kind of a chemical. But what happens to beeswax when it is heated? It will melt, but it has a characteristic that it keeps the heat for an extended period of time. And so that's what we want. And so the unit in the center, which is heat on demand tray activator, or heat activator. I can't read or see anymore. Are you familiar with induction cooking? Okay. I would like induction cooking at my house. Anyway, it's not going to be. What you do is put that unitized base on the induction heater, and in 10 seconds it will get to the appropriate temperature so that you can put that onto the tray. You can put the plate of hot food excuse me, on that unitized base. You can cover it with a dome that's on the right-hand side, and that food should remain at appropriate service temperature, maintaining microbiological safety, for 30 to 45 minutes. In reality, you're good to do 20. The realism here. So in terms of patient tray assembly, these are the components that are going to help to keep conventional produced food hot until it reaches the patient. What kind of heat maintenance system do you have in the hospitals where you have been involved, or do you know? Water? Yeah, okay. That works too. It's less expensive than this, and if it works equally as well, why not? So the methodology that we are using here is centralized production and centralized assembly and distribution. And so the other component that is missing from this system is that unit that's down in the lower left-hand corner. And that is an oven, actually, in which the plates are placed. And so the plates are taken to maybe about 150 degrees C. The unitized base is that temperature or hotter. The dome keeps the heat in. And so that goes onto the tray. The remainder of the tray is not refrigerated, and we use speed to get the tray to the patient as rapidly as possible. There are some issues that I think that we need to deal with in this situation, is that in the event that there's a delay in distributing the tray to the patient, what's eventually going to happen to that food?
It's going to get cold.
Yes, the inevitable result. Another issue that we need to consider, and that is, since the unitized base and the plate are so hot, what is going to happen on that plate as it is being distributed to the patient?
It's going to burn.
It will
Burn?
It will burn? Probably not, but you're on the right track. It's going to continue to cook. And so if you have a very tender vegetable, for example, or a very tender meat, and it is on there, that meat is going to tend to dry out and it's going to be more and more unpalatable. So this is an issue in terms of menu planning. You've got to plan your menu in terms of the kind of distribution system that you have. So you see how all of this is so related? It makes it much more difficult. We were talking the other day about fried potatoes, and you want crispy potatoes, and you put them in this hot environment, you get mush. And so it's not the best kind of approach for us. So this is an example of a patient tray assembly in the U.S. in which there are two sides. At this closest end is where we would begin with that lower rater with the trays. And so we would put on the tray, we begin with condiments, sugar, salt, pepper, that kind of thing that would go on, flatware, packages of ketchup if that's necessary, or whatever other condiments that we're dealing with. And then in each station along the patient tray line, the various components of the meal are put onto the patient tray, and at the very end of the tray line, that tray is checked against the menu to make certain that everything is there. Then the tray is put into an enclosed cart and is distributed to the patient. That is the typical approach that's taken, but there are several ways in which we can do patient tray assembly. In some very small hospitals, they use the employee cafeteria as the way in which they assemble patient trays. They don't open the cafeteria until all of the patient trays have been served. And so the items that are on the menu are on the cafeteria line, and there's an individual who is calling, communicating to a server what needs to go onto the hot plate. And while the hot plate is being assembled, this caller is putting the cold food on, takes the hot plate, puts it on there, puts it onto a cart, and the cart is distributed to the patient. Probably not a bad way to go. The other kind of tray assembly system is a mechanical type, like the one in the center. It's a skate wheel. It's just wheels on either side, and the tray fits on that, and the tray line is inclined just a little bit, and so gravity will slowly take the tray down, and so this gives the opportunity for people on either side of the tray line to put the appropriate menu items on the tray. The one on the top, on the left-hand side, the top left, is essentially the same thing, except it's a roller rather than a skate wheel. But the typical approach is a motorized conveyor belt. And that's what we see on the bottom right. Now, the speed of that conveyor belt is a very important factor in that the speed of that belt is going to determine the number of trays that you assemble per minute. We're concerned about productivity, but we're also concerned about accuracy of the patient tray. If you push the employees on the patient tray line too hard, they're going to miss things. And so you trade one problem for another, is that down at the end of this tray line, you're going to end up with trays that are not complete or mistaken. And so what you've got to do then is to put them aside, make those corrections, and then try to fit it back into the appropriate tray so it's delivered to the right unit and to the right patient. Nothing can be worse. Well, yes, there are things that can be worse, but getting the right tray to the wrong patient, or the wrong patient gets a tray, or the tray that this patient really needs has gone to another unit and we don't know where that other unit is. And so we've got to be very methodical and precise in terms of the assembly of these patient trays. Now, there's some other approaches that can be taken to assembly of patient trays, and that's multiple lines. Our hospital at Loma Linda was originally designed to have 2 parallel tray lines. The rate of assembly that was assumed by the designer was about 3 trays that were assembled every minute. And if you're doing 100, we did 300 or more trays per meal. And if you're doing 3 a minute, isn't that about 100 minutes? That's almost 2 hours. Is that going to be acceptable to patients? Either they get their noon meal too soon, or they get it mid-afternoon. And so the solution for that is to have a second tray line. What you've done is doubled your labor. Is that going to be cost-effective? Don't think so. So what do you do in this situation? Well, the approach that we took was, let's train our employees so that they will work faster. So we got it to the point where our patient trays were being assembled at the rate of about 5 trays a minute without too much difficulty. What had to happen is that the speed of the belt was increased, but we also increased the distance between the trays so that there was sufficient time for the employee to read what was on the menu, actually assemble or to portion that product, and to put it on the plate. So if we're doing 5 trays a minute, that means those 300, it's going to take 300 divided by 5 is going to be 60? Yeah, 1 hour. And that's a reasonable amount of time for a patient tray line. So going from 3 to 5 made a tremendous difference in terms of how long it took us totally to prepare the patient trays. We never, ever did the second tray line. It was designed, but we never went that way. I have seen hospitals where they have 2 and 3 tray lines to get all of the trays assembled. These are hospitals that have 1,000 to 1,200 patients per meal, and that's, I don't want to go there. So that's the use of multiple lines. Then there's a split line. I don't think that we have an example of this, but I will try to give you a verbal picture of this mammoth, that I'll call it. It will hold 20 trays. It's a cart that is about as long as these 2 tables. And in this section, there are 2 doors. and there are 10 places for trays. There is a refrigerator part of this, and so when plugged in and turned on, it will keep that area cold. And so the first step in assembling trays for the patients was we had a cold tray line. And this would begin at about 10 a.m. before the noon meal. And so very quickly, all of the salads and the desserts and beverages and milk and that type of thing was put onto the tray. The tray's put in here. We had about 20 individual carts that we had to load, so we went rather quickly. Then over on this side was another door, and behind this door was a tray that would pull out. And in a separate operation then, the hot food was assembled, put onto the plate, put into this tray in the refrigerator, not in the refrigerator, in the heated part, thank you. And so it was there. There were approximately four plates that could fit in there. So there was a total of 20, so there were at least 5 different trays that were there. And then on the top of that was not a refrigerated, but a thermos, kind of an insulated container where iced tea and coffee were served. And then there was another one for the soup. And so just before the carts went out to the various patient units for service, a pot of soup was put into the section of that cart. These carts weighed about 1,000 kilograms. They were very, very heavy. They were propelled by a drive wheel that was attached to a starter motor for an automobile. Very strong. We needed those drive wheels because in the hospital that we were using these, the hospital was built on a hill. And there were pathways between each of the sections. And so these very heavy carts had to be pushed up those steep hills. And so that's why it had the drive wheel to help in that process. But still, a lot of muscle power was required to get it to the top. Then when the cart got to the patient unit, the porter took the tray, then took the associated hot tray, put it onto the tray, then portioned out coffee or tea as was necessary, and soup, put it on the tray, gave it to the nurse to distribute to the patient. Or if the patient was well, that's kind of an oxymoron. You know what oxymorons are? Yeah. If the patient was well, that means that they could get up out of their bed. They had to come and get their own tray. These were soldiers. Okay. So it took about 20 minutes to serve those 20 trays, about a tray a minute. Then at the end of the meal, the trays were collected, put back into the respective areas, and then the carts were pushed down the hill. Now, if we thought that it was going to be difficult to get them up the hill, what about getting them down the hill? The solution to that was to put the drive wheel in reverse. So it was going backwards as the cart was going forward, functioning as a brake. And so that's where we had to serve coffee to the maintenance people to keep those carts in repair so that we had enough carts to serve the hundreds of patients that we had, particularly during the flu season. That's probably the worst case scenario of trade distribution that I can think of. Still, conventional production system. These are close, this is a more close-up view of heat maintenance methods. This is that induction heater. But heat maintenance methods range from no method at all and a pellet system. And I have described to you the pellet system. And in this situation, we're heating that. I just called it a unitized base rather than a pellet, but it's the same thing. The pellet system really, I'm going to use this word again, a donut. It was a donut made out of iron that was heated very hot, and then it was put into the bottom of a stainless steel container, and then the hot plate was put over that. The unitized base then put all of these together so you could do it in one operation rather than 2 or 3 operations. Boy, there's lots of pictures of that. Oh, here. This is the cart that I was telling you about. So on the left-hand side is the refrigerated trays. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right. Now, this is a little bit different than the one that we used because the place where the stainless steel dome is, that's the hot food. It was probably about this wide rather than this wide as it is on that picture. And then the tea and coffee are on the top, but we also had an inset where the soup was placed. And then we had a styrofoam container that we put ice cream in. So that's the way we dealt with ice cream. And so this was kind of an independent cart that went and served to the patients. Now this is another kind of a cart that would be used in a completely different production and distribution system. This would be used in a cook-chill or a cook-freeze system. Let's talk specifically about the cook-chill system, because the cook-freeze system will eventually go down to the point where the foods are thawed, and so it becomes a cook-chill system then. And so in this cart, the hot food and the cold food are portioned. All of the food is cold. We don't warm the chilled food that has been made weeks ago, but we do that closer to the unit. This cart then, when it is full, is pushed to the unit, and on the unit there is a large mechanical piece that is a refrigerator. And this cart then goes up right underneath that, and there's a hole in the top of that so that refrigerated air can circulate through that cart. So keeping the food, all of the food, cold. And so cold tray assembly is done just exactly like hot tray assembly, with the exception that we're not dealing with hot food. Now, this is a very similar cart to what we had looked at before. It would still be used for a cook-chill system, but there is a difference. The food is assembled cold, both the salads and beverages and what will become the hot food. And it too is placed underneath that big unit in on the wall, and it is kept refrigerated. But there is a fundamental difference. And that fundamental difference is that the plate underneath the dome in this environment can be heated. And so while the rest of the food is at a refrigerated temperature, the hot food is gently reheated, bringing it up to appropriate temperature for service. And it can be programmed such that if you know that there is a patient that is not going to be ready for the meal until after a test, you can program it so that it will be ready when the patient is ready rather than it's 12 o'clock and everyone will eat. So that's one of the advantages of this kind of production and distribution system. So we talked first at the very beginning about the concept of centralized or decentralized production and distribution, but we also have some centralized ways in which we can take the food to a central galley and distributed the food from there. And so this is called a galley system. A galley system, not an E. Should not be an E in there. It's too late. I'm having a galley system or a pantry. And so a pantry looks like that. And so it has a coffee machine, it has a microwave oven, it has refrigerated storage underneath, it has hot and cold. And when I say hot, I'm talking about almost 100 degrees water that's there for coffee and instant soups and that sort of thing. And so the nurse then in assembly serve or in cook chill could then bring the hot plate, because it's all there, put the hot plate in the microwave, cook, shouldn't have used that word, reheated the food, because the food's already cooked, and then place the plate back on the tray and it's served to the patient. This is another factor that we've got to consider when we plan a menu. How is the food being reheated? If we're dealing with a microwave oven, what happens when we have very dense food like mashed potatoes and a very simple food like a fish or something with the meat very small, or peas, something like that, where the amount of time that it takes to heat the potatoes is going to overcook the meat. And so you've got to balance that out in your menu planning as well, which just makes it even more difficult. Now, in terms of final distribution to the patient, there are several approaches that we can take. One is no heat maintenance at all. And one system that I lovingly call the Nike system. Now, does that bring up anything in your mind? You know, is that some sort of complex missile system that is going to be done? I have a son who works for the Nike company. He's a design engineer. And so this distribution method involves putting on your Nike tinny runners and taking the tray and running as fast as you can to the patient to get it there before the food gets cold. That's the Nike system. The other one is the cart with no heat maintenance at all. We assemble those trays. Hot food is hot, cold food is cold. We put them on the tray, on a cart. It may be an enclosed cart. It may be an open cart. But we put it on that cart and we run like crazy to get it to the patients in time. Or it might be an enclosed cart. But there's something that is consistent here in that there's nothing to keep cold food cold and hot food hot. And so you've got to really know your patient and know that they're ready to eat so that there is no delay. And so this is another picture of a cold maintenance system where there's a compressor and a heating in the cart, so the cold food stays cold while the hot food is being heated. If you have some extra money, that's a good way to go. It's expensive. And so this is essentially the same what we've talked about, heating in a cold environment, but rather than this hot plate that the plate of food is on, we're going to use a convection oven rather than the heated contact surface. And so the convection oven is going to cook the food in about 35 minutes. And then you, in one location, you're assembling the tray, putting the hot food on that tray, and giving it to a hostess who will deliver the tray to the patient. So this is almost like room service, but not quite to that extent. Not quite the freedom that many patients enjoy in room service. And so in order to use this system where both cold and heat maintenance, this is essentially what we have been talking about for the last little while. And so we have active heating like in a microwave oven or in a convection oven, and we have timed reheating that would be on these contact plates as it is sitting waiting to be distributed. What typically happens is that the trays are assembled in the following order. The employees come to work in the morning and they assemble the noon meal, beginning at about 8 o'clock. The noon meal is assembled, the carts are then distributed to the units. Then at about 11 o'clock, the evening meal is assembled and then distributed to the units. And then before going home, they assemble breakfast for the next day. And so at the end of each meal, those carts have come back to the central kitchen for washing. And so at the last meal, the carts are remaining there overnight. And so then in the morning, as lunch meals are being delivered, the breakfast trays are being taken away. That's a very efficient system. It is easier for the employees because in a conventional production system and conventional heat maintenance systems, you have two shifts. You have typically a full-time shift that works breakfast and lunch, and then you have a part-time shift that works for the evening meal. And then they also handle mid-meal breaks and snacks and that type of thing. Are there any questions on what we have done so far in terms of room service, not room service, in terms of maintenance of heat and tray assembly, distribution, and service? Let's talk about room service for a moment. We talked about it just a little bit the other day, but with room service, the statistics are showing that patient satisfaction is 99% or above. In a conventional production system with conventional distribution, you're very lucky to get 70%. So there's a 30% increase. Well, it increases 30% to almost 100% satisfaction because the patient can get what they want. Because as they, I'll use the term come and go in terms of their appetite, they're ordering a meal closer to the point that they're going to actually consume it. So when I order a meal today for tomorrow, I don't know how I'm going to feel tomorrow. I don't feel good today, and so I order just a little bit or if that at all. But then tomorrow when I get that meal, oh, I sure am hungry. I sure wish I had ordered more. And so there's problems associated with patient satisfaction. With room service, we can accommodate all of the modified diets that are available in that facility. And we almost always will use a restaurant-style menu. And patients are accustomed to a restaurant-style menu. They go out and eat, and so they're accustomed to ordering what they want. And if you order what you want, is that going to be satisfying? That's one of the reasons that you get such a high patient acceptability. And so it's a very, very pleasant experience for the patient. In the United States, room service is categorized as best practice. So in terms of quality practice, that list that we've been working on, you remember, we could put on there, is room service available, yes or no? And if no, best practice is going to say that we really should work on that. And currently about 38% of hospitals have room service, but over 40% of us are saying we're thinking about it, that we will go to room service at some point in the future. So I think that that is a good situation as far as patient service is concerned. The thing that I don't know is how cost-effective it is. I have read some statistics, and I think that I have it here for you, that in a 100-bed hospital, changing to room service will save them $100,000 a year. Or that's $1,000 per bed per year. That's probably a pretty good reason to change to room service. But even if there was no money savings, I am attracted to the concept because of the impact that it has on patient care and patient satisfaction. And it's the most green method of providing patient meals. Environmentally friendly. Yeah. Okay. The reason why it is environmentally friendly is that we don't have all of this costly equipment that is going to maintain cold food cold and hot food cold. We don't need really any heat maintenance system available. We're going to,
energy.
yeah, that all takes energy. And so the energy that we're going to use is the Nike system to get it up there as quickly as possible. So what is the room service system? How does it relate? Well, first of all, in terms of input, we're dealing with the menu. The menu is the way in which we communicate what the patient wants, and it is done via telephone. It may be done by a spoken menu. And sometimes it can be done through a touchscreen system like this. And so the patient can touch, or the assistant can touch what is needed, and it's electronically transmitted to the kitchen for almost immediate preparation and service. So the process associated with this is tray assembly. So tray assembly is not the tray assembly that we've been talking about this afternoon. It is each individual tray is assembled when the patient wants that tray. And the output is a tray that is going to bring satisfaction to the employee, to the customer, to the patient. So that is a brief overview of the kinds of distribution systems and heat maintenance systems that are used in many parts of the world. I think Germany and other European countries have been leaders in coming up with these systems, and we have adopted them in the United States. Do you want to talk about something else? There's one other area that I think that we can talk about in terms of patient service. Patient service that is going to really result in great satisfaction for the patient. The approach that I'm going to take, I'm going to completely divorce myself from patient tray service and talk about something else. But even though we're talking about something else, we're really talking about patient tray service. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't at all. You live 100 years ago. Okay? Can you imagine yourself living 100 years ago? What was it like? It was your birthday. And you celebrate with a birthday cake or something special? I'll use an example of a cake. And so you or a friend or a mother or someone will take flour and shortening and eggs and flavorings and milk and make and bake a cake for you and then decorate it, and you have a celebration. But a large part of that celebration has to do with making the cake. Okay? Then time goes by. Technology increases. Things are a little bit different. And we now have a cake mix. So we go to the market, we buy a cake mix, we make it, we decorate it, and have a celebration. It's much easier for the person who's responsible for putting the party together. Typically the mother, yes? Then technology continues to increase, and the mother, the shopper, can go to the grocery store and buy a cake already made. It's already decorated, it already says happy birthday, and so we gladly take that cake home and have a celebration.
I never have that taste of homemade cake.
Oh, you ruin it. You are absolutely right. Absolutely right. But as technology increases, what do we do to celebrate birthdays?
Making the cake by myself.
I'll come over and we'll have cake. We go to a place where the cake is already there, the meal is already there, the playthings for all the children are there. So what has happened in terms of this progression over time is that we have changed from the very values that we had as homemakers and making things from scratch, where that was the important thing, to the point of view now where the experience is the important thing. And we see this happening not only in celebration of birthdays, but people who travel. I was on the plane coming over here, I was sitting next to an older lady, 75, so that's not so old, is it? I don't think she was 80, but her husband had died 4 years ago. And while he was still alive, they did a lot of traveling. But now that he is gone, she has teamed up with other organizations, and they were going on a safari in Africa. She was seeking an experience that she will remember for the rest of her life. And so people are traveling. We talked about places that we each had been. I go to Africa quite often. I've been there 10 times, going there again this summer. And one of the things that I dearly like to do is to go on a photo safari to see the animals. And to me, there is no better experience on this earth as experiencing those animals. The lions, all of the antelope and larger animals of that kind, the elephants, giraffes, and rhinoceroses and hippopotamuses and all of that sort of thing. For me, that has been a real experience, something that I remember. And so I had some pictures from my first safari, and so I started showing her. And she just could not wait to get there. But there are other places that we had been together, to China and to Tibet and other places. And so we just had a wonderful time as we flew along. But it's all done for the purpose of experience. So now we come to the patient in the hospital. What kind of experience is that patient having? Is it a positive experience or is it a negative experience? And I think that as dietitians, we need to do our very best to provide a very positive experience for our patients. And so the systems approach to management is going to help us in putting these pieces together. And if we have an objective of making the experience positive for our patients, we can select those components that are actually going to do that for us. In conclusion, I had a friend, a retired dietitian. She was probably 95, and I would go and visit her. She was not in a care center. She was in a retirement home at age 95. She was independent. But the thing that she missed the most in this retirement center was that there was no place for her to cook. She wanted to come to my house, and she wanted to make cookies, she wanted to make cake, she wanted to make all the things that she yearned for. She wanted to continue that experience, and that was what was missing in her life in that extended, well, not extended care, it was a retirement home. It's a very special retirement home. They didn't do anything that most retirement homes would differently than what most would do. But the average age in this retirement home was 90 years of age. The oldest person was about 104. Living independently in this retirement facility. If they lived in this facility, they went through a cafeteria line to eat. They had to carry their own tray. They had to do everything for themselves. They had to do their own clothing, washing their clothing, keeping their room clean, their house clean. And so an average age of 90 was, I think, a phenomenal part of what was happening here. And, for them, this was a very positive experience, staying out of an extended care facility where they could live on their own and have a very, very positive life.
Enjoying creation by cooking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because it's a positive experience.
Yes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things that we need to look at as we enter the profession, is choosing system components that are going to achieve the objectives that we have. And I think that positive patient care, positive patient experiences are going to be important for our guests in our facilities.
Open kitchen.
Sorry?
An open kitchen.
Yes. Yeah, that would be a good thing. My mother, as she got older, she was not like that. I mean, she died when she was 84. And these people were over 90, 95. But, she would leave the gas on after she had cooked something. It could be a dangerous situation. And so, if you have a kitchen in a retirement facility, probably you would need some supervision, but still, it's a very positive experience for the residents in that facility. So, well, I wish you a very pleasant weekend.
Thank you.
I hope that you have a restful time. Thank you. And next week, on Monday, we're going to talk a little bit about sanitation and safety.